Okay, George, I think we're ready to go. My name's Michael Nelson, and I work for Canonical doing writing a lot of charms, I guess, for deploying some of our newer services. And we've also got Patrick here. Patrick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. So I'm working on the Python. Oops. Sorry. Need to mute that. So yeah, I'm working on the Python Django charm, and recently I migrated to use Ansible. So I'm really thrilled to listen to this talk and participate and maybe sharing my input on that.
Excellent, thanks. And we've also got Simon, who also works on the same team as me. Simon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey guys.
Cool. So, what I'm hoping to do, just let me paste, I'm pasting a link in IRC to the slides. Just do that again. If someone can put that in the topic, that might help for people who join later on. I'm hoping to do a number of things. So, basically, I want to give a brief overview of Ansible for charmers. So some people will have already used Ansible, others may not, but just a 5-minute demo of why it's actually useful. And then have a look at how we can actually use Ansible to declare your charm, how it makes it much easier for us when we're writing charms. A little kind of segue of 5 best things that I've found, or others have also found, about charming using Ansible. And then lastly, I'm really keen, the most exciting part for me is the ability that Ansible gives you to reuse a lot of the functionality that you add into your charms. So, and along the way, just because I know what it's like when in these presentations, you can also be deploying and investigating an example demo charm. And at the end, if we've got time, we'll also find out a few people that I've been chatting with have had some issues that they've found when they've been using Ansible. So it'll be useful to hear those as well and see if there's any workarounds. So, looking on slide 3, there's some instructions there that you can follow. If you've got a Juju environment bootstrapped, you can follow those. Hang on, Masood is asking for the link. Just pasting that again, I see. Actually, George, could you pass? Oh no, she should have. I assume she's got the Hangout link there as well. Yeah, so slide 3, there's some instructions that you can do that'll actually get you set up and deploying a charm that uses Ansible that we'll be looking at in a bit more detail later on. And if you get bored, there's a few things that you can do there while we're going through. So, first thing, a brief overview of Ansible charms on slide 5. So, the main thing that Ansible aims to provide is simplicity and maximum ease of use. The other thing which is really useful, I think, for us is the auditability. Sorry. Just anyone who's not even familiar with Ansible, it's not like looking at Python code where you've got to follow through the different function calls and so on. It's actually quite easy to read through and see what this is doing, as well as we'll see later the logs. And yeah, as I mentioned before, being able to reuse stuff is something that really stands out. So what does it look like? Slide 6. That's just a typical use of an Ansible module. In this case, it's one which is installing a bunch of packages. It's pretty straightforward. You give most of your tasks a name, and that's actually used as part of the audit. So you see that in your log, as well as makes it a lot easier to read. On the next slide, you can see that it also gives you an option to handle changes when they happen. So most Ansible modules are actually created to be idempotent. It's not strictly true in that you can write them so that they're not idempotent, but generally, if you do the right thing, they should be. And so that allows you to actually have notifications that'll only get run if something changes. So in this example, you can see that a configuration file gets written, but Apache will only be restarted if that actually changed. So Ansible doesn't actually overwrite the configuration file when it runs this task. It writes it to a temp directory and checks, is it different? And only if it's different, it'll overwrite it and then run the handler. The other interesting thing there is that you might have multiple tasks which will trigger a handler, but the handler will only be run once all the tasks are finished, all handlers. So other useful Ansible features on the next slide. So things that are useful to us when we're writing charms using Ansible. The fact that they're organized into a playbook, which can be a single file, or it can be a combination of your own custom files as well as reusable roles. One of the really useful things that we'll be using is that tasks can be tagged. And so Ansible can just play all the tasks from your playbook, which are tagged with a certain tag. And lastly, something else that we use behind the scenes, we don't actually have to deal with it when we're just using the helpers, but that Ansible allows us to define a bunch of variables. So in our case, the whole Juju context, whether it's the config for the charm as well as any relation data and things like that, can just be made completely available for us in our charm. So what does it look like in an actual charm? Using Ansible to declare your charm. Similar to if you've already used the charm helpers the Python charm helpers library, you'll already know that generally you'll be symlinking all your hook executables in the hooks folder to your hooks.py, and that's exactly the same here. On the next slide, you can actually see what a hooks.py looks like. Hang on, someone's just messaging. Sorry. So in this case, it's really, really simple. If you've seen any other Python charms and had a look at the hooks.py, this will be a huge change because generally they're either really, really long or they're broken up into a whole bunch of different modules. Here, we've broken most of the functionality out into our Ansible playbook. So you can see, you can stay on that slide. I'll just explain briefly what it's doing. Well, going into the details, I guess this is what it's doing behind the scenes that you won't have to care about. That makes our lives easy when you're using it to write a charm. So whenever the hooks.py is run, it creates this Ansible hooks object, which will automatically read in your playbook that you've defined and find out all the different tags that are used within that playbook and register a hook for each. If there's an explicit function for the current hook, like you can see in that example, there's the install hook. It'll be run if that's the name, if it matches the current hook, it's then run. The helper then writes out the current Juju state, so that'll be all your config for your charm, as well as the relations, all the info about the different relations that the charm has. And once that's done, the playbook Ansible will run all the tags, which are all the tasks which are tagged with the current hook name. So that's what's going on behind the scenes that you won't need to normally deal with, so that you'll actually be able to do what you see on slide 14. So this is a real charm. This is the Elasticsearch charm, and that's it. That's the playbook for the Elasticsearch charm. It's got the handler at the top, you can see, which just allows us to restart Elasticsearch when needed. There's obviously quite a bit of functionality that's down in the two included tasks there, so installing Elasticsearch as well as the peer relations. But the main thing it needs to do is to update the configuration whenever on a config change hook, and all that's doing is writing out a template file, and it notifies to restart Elasticsearch.
Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, please do.
Could you share your screen so we can actually show this to people so the video is more useful?
I can.
Yeah.
So
on that toolbar I showed you on the left, there's a little green and white arrow, and then that'll
green and white arrow. Hang on. Screen share.
And then pick your browser window, open a new tab, and then just
Yep.
put this in there. Yep. Okay.
Just waiting for
Sorry
it
to interrupt.
No, that's good. I'm just not sure that it's doing what it should. I'm clicking on screen share, and either my computer's really slow or it's Yeah. Sorry, I can't screen share. Would you, George? Can you screen share the
I will do
slides
that.
for yours?
Just
and then I can
click on.
select you to.
Yeah.
So I'll keep talking while George is sorting that out. So if you've got slide 14 now open, the Elasticsearch charm, so you can see yeah, the update configuration task is the main one, and it'll notify Elasticsearch if and only that file changes. The other items on slide 15, you can see they're really simple start and stop tasks, which all they're doing is using a built-in Ansible module, the service module. And the main one, which is going to be used, is when a client joins, and it's just doing the relation set command. So generally, Ansible provides a whole suite of different modules that you can use to be able to do basically whatever you want. Anything that you think you need to do, someone has already needed to do in the past, and they've shared it, and it's generally available. But if there's something that you can't yet do, for example, here relation set isn't something there's not yet a Juju module for Ansible. So there I'm using the Ansible command module, which is kind of a thing that you should only use if there isn't a module supported. So yeah, it doesn't get much more difficult than that. You can see that's a playbook. It's pretty straightforward to read. Even if you hadn't used Ansible before, you can read through that and see what's actually going on. So quick interlude, and I'll get the other guys who are on the call to join in here if they've got other things to add. But the 5 best things about charming with Ansible. I asked some people who had used this earlier for a bit of input, and the different things that they said, well, one of the first ones that came up, I'll do that, as well as the next one is one that, for me, is really important. It's just that it's simple to use and easy to read. Obviously, that's something we've already looked at. Auditability of logs. That should be auditability, sorry, of logs. If you take a look at that link there, or in your own environment, if you did deploy the example service at the start of the session, you can have a look at the log, the Juju log yourself. But you'll see there that it starts with a normal Juju log, which has got a lot of information. But as soon as Ansible takes over the install hook, you'll see that it gives you a really nice summary of all the tasks that were executed, which ones weren't executed because they were already okay, yeah, and which things changed, which is quite handy. The other ones, yeah, it's. Do you want to talk about that one, Tom? The fact that it's declarative.
Sure. Charms with Python, as a lot of charms are written in, and every time you want to do something, you write a function to do it, which is great. We have the library of functions in charm helpers, which allows to solve the basic tasks that you need to do, like adding apt repositories or messing with files and the system. And the downside of that is that it's very script something quick and dirty that does the job. The declarative side, and if you get it may not. It's not 100% sure. Whereas because Ansible's designed to be declarative, behind it designed to check things. They have the optimizations that Mike mentioned. But they don't. If you're going to say this file should be here, and if it is there, then it doesn't need to do anything, which is quite nice. And also, it's not rather than saying what you want to do, say I want to put this file in this, you're saying I want this file to be in this state, and it's sort of more easier. It's reasonable and easy to audit. The configuration management tools kind of adopt this declarative approach, right? Converging the system to a known good state. They sort of what you do. It's like what you do with all declarative systems. You push the complexity down to the lower level get there. It's the same with OpenGL. And a lot of the other tools do, which is you can just. I'll just drop my.
It's not just me. I was hoping it was just me.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. I just turned that off. So I was just saying, this idea of declaring what you want the state to be and letting the underlying library, Ansible in this case, make sure that it's managed and is in that state is quite nice to reason about. And as Michael pointed out, it gives you this nice auditability that you knew what changed when you could run your Ansible playbook and it's in the log, which is quite nice. And I find it personally easy to reason about rather than having to tests, write all the procedural code and then having to test your procedural code. So a number of times I've had to write a helper function to touch the file system in some way, and then I have to test it, and it's much more difficult to test, whereas I can trust Ansible that it has a module that does this. I don't have to worry about it anymore. So it saves me a lot of time with writing small functions to do simple things, which Python is not that great at interfacing with the system. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, because Ansible itself is written in Python, it's actually quite easy to write your own modules if you need to. The last thing I had, as I mentioned earlier, it's on the next slide, is that it's got a great model for reuse and sharing of common tasks, and I'll dive into that in a sec. I just wanted to check, Patrick, was there anything else from your experience, things that you love about using Ansible, or things that have been difficult to do?
Yeah, I think Ansible is quite great. Yeah, I agree with you about the simplicity and also about not repeating myself from if I'm building like other charms and things like that. Another thing about roles is that you can share it between multiple charms, and in the case of Python Django, like you have charms like cfile that are using Django. You have a review board. You have like several charms that are using Django, but in all their own ways, and like that makes like things not optimal. Like for example, if you want to put a cfile behind a proxy, you'll need to manually change the Django configuration to make it work. But if we have an Ansible role for Django, for example, it could be easy to just automate that kind of things. And I think that this is like reusing the patterns in several charms. I think that's what makes Ansible great. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other great thing there is that it'll make it a lot easier to maintain as well. So as you make improvements to the Django charm,
True.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to be updating multiple branches and so on. So Wes has also said that the other advantage in Ansible is that the project is very strict about being able to ship everything out of the box. So you've got reduced dependencies, making it reliable to depend on the charms, either from packages or vendor. Yep. So let's have a look at how we can actually do that reuse. So the next slides, 20 and 21, reusable charm roles. So I'll just briefly talk about this, and then I'm hoping we can go back if people have actually run that deployment, and we can, people can have a look through there and ask questions from the start. So an Ansible role, it's just a collection of a reusable collection of tasks and handles, as well as some other things if you want them, like variables and defaults, and a standard directory layout. So if you open up the playbook for that example charm that you've hopefully got there locally from the start, you'll see this role defined at the top for NRP external master. Or you can just click on that link, and you'll see the same thing. But all that role is doing is, all that statement is doing is saying include the NRPE external master role and pass it the following values. So not only can we reuse this same role in other charms, but we can also reuse it multiple times here if we need to have multiple Nagios checks. In this case, it's just setting up Nagios checks which can be tested.
We have a question from the audience here. Villa asks, does this mean there's no Ansible playbook for Django yet? And then he's hoping.
Patrick's probably the best to answer that.
There is one, that I just finished it this morning, and it's on my Launchpad code list. I have not fully tested it yet, but it's as far as I know, it was working sweet, and fine. If you wanna, I can paste the link on IRC for that. Oh, but it's not in the store yet.
And there are what we're going to look at here is a whiskey app role, which Patrick's looking at using as well. So it should make it a lot easier to deploy. Well, let's have a look. Next slide, slide 22, talks exactly about this. So, George, I'm not seeing the slides. I'm not sure if other people are, but slide 22. So, it's just, we can skip over that actually. That's just showing you what the NRP external master role, what the task that it runs, and so on. But if we, slide 23. Right. So what you've got there for the Nagios checks, it's a small game, but it's one that we already had with Charm Helpers Python support. It already had helpers which would enable you to kind of reuse the Nagios setup. But looking at slide 24, this is where it becomes key for me, the shareability. So we're currently deploying quite a few charms, quite a few Python Whiskey charms for different services that we've got. And for each service, for each deployment, it needs to do all of those things that you see listed there: setting up specific users, installing the built code into a specific location, installing any package dependencies, relate to a backend, rendering the settings, relate to the Whiskey service, set up log rotation, updating to a new code base without upgrading the charm, as well as support rolling upgrades to a new code base. But out of all those things, there's only really 3, 4, and 5 which are actually specific to an application. So what we've started doing just recently with some of the more recent deploys is, as you can see on slide 25, I'm assuming other people can see that. I'm still not seeing it, but that could be a bandwidth issue there. But on slide 25, or if you open up the playbook, playbook.yaml for the charm that you downloaded at the start, you'll see that there's a Whiskey app role there. Excellent, so other people can see them. So that Whiskey app role, it's all we're doing is telling it the location of our Whiskey file. So in this case, the example Whiskey has an application function in it that'll give us the Whiskey. Oh, I've already selected George as the default, but apparently it's switching to others. It defines the code, whereabouts the code archive is that should be used to now let's switch back to me. There you go. Where the code archive is, and it's got a little clause there which says only actually use this role if the build label is specified. So with that, and with all the functionality kind of wrapped up into this Whiskey app role, the actual charm can just have one task in it, which in this case is just writing a custom configuration file. So because different projects, they have their different ways of handling config. In the example that you've got there that you would have downloaded at the start, hopefully, it's not actually doing anything. I'm just using the Ansible debug module there, which allows you just to output output things, but normally you'd be writing out a file from a template and then restarting your WSGI service, and that's all you need. Everything else comes out of the box with the WSGI app role. So just taking a quick look at that WSGI app role on slide 27. There's links. Again, you can look locally under roles/WSGI app and you'll /tasks, and you'll see these files there, or you can click on the links to see them on GitHub. But basically, it's doing three things. So there's setupmachine.yaml, which just sets up the required users, the dependencies, the directory layout, based on options that you provide, as well as log rotation. There's the setup code, which is handling getting hold of your code tarball, either from, like, if it's been inlined as part of the payload of the charm, or from an external service, extracting it and putting it into the right directories with the right permissions and so on. And then if you look at the main.yaml, all it needs to worry about is symlinking to the correct code base that you currently want to use. So that's something that you can configure so that you're able to switch your code revision on the fly just using Juju set. It also handles, obviously, the WSGI and website relations. So so that's kind of an overview of the WSGI app reusable role. I'm hoping, was everyone able to run that code from the start to actually deploy it in their local environment? Well, not everyone, but I assume some people hopefully did. If so, you can actually have a look at the README that you'll find there, and it's got instructions for how you can actually do a rolling upgrade as part of the example demo there. So that was everything I had to present. I was keen to so a few different things. If there were any questions people who tried using Ansible and had issues, or whatever it might be, as well as if there's no other questions, we could also look at. I'd be keen to hear about pain points that people have had. Patrick, you mentioned that you had some questions, or
yes. If no one else has some, you said at the beginning that you wanted to put the roles, the roles in Charm Helper. Do you have any plans how to sync roles in different charms?
Yeah, so if you look at the make file for that example repository that I linked to at the start, the make file in there has a sync Ansible roles task, and it's just pulling. I've got a separate Ansible roles repository. It's just pulling that into a template directory and copying across the roles that I want there. So it's not quite as neat as the sync Ansible, the sync charm helpers utility, which allows you to specify that in a YAML file, but it does allow you to basically pull in whichever roles you want to use for your charm.
Great.
Simon, do you want to talk about any pain points you've had, or things that are difficult? Or?
So the biggest thing that I miss from developing the charms in Python is the unit testability, which we've talked about before, Michael. So when you're writing Python functions to write some template file to disk or create a directory or whatever, it's relatively easy in Python to write mock out the file system access or the sub-process call or whatever, and you can have nice unit tests that are fast and light. With Ansible, there is no layer to, well, there's not one available at the moment anyway, no layer to do that. So it means tests need to be pretty much all functional. You can do some basic stuff, like you can add Ansible provides a syntax check, so you can check the syntax of your playbooks and things like that, which is good. But you need to use a full functional test with a full, VM or LXC using Amulet or whatever other tool you want to do. which is fine. I do miss the ability to just run a quick test. I think in theory, I mean, Ansible's Python, so in theory, it should be possible to mock out calls to subprocess or open or other things, but that's a piece of work, and the Ansible community are not particularly keen on the idea of unit testing playbooks. They are more settled on the idea of doing functional testing, which is fine. Functional testing is not, it's just a lot slower, I think, is my only issue with it. So I do miss that from the Python stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, there is just to be clear there. So Ansible itself is really seems to be well unit tested, but yeah, in terms of so one thing that Simon actually showed me the other day was that one guy set up automatic tests from GitHub using to test his roles and make sure his roles are doing what they do. But they're functional tests which install on a VM and make sure that the end result is what you'd expect. But yeah, the best we can kind of do locally in our charms is to actually just verify that the syntax is all right and then have a functional test on top of that. So Matt has a question. Are there some good places to get more information about Ansible, tutorials or good links on the web? Yeah, I mean the Ansible documentation itself, which I've linked to in the slides, but I'll just get a direct link, is great. I kind of have that open all the time to if someone else has got it open. Yeah. So it's just docs.ansible.com. And it has, I think it's really well written. It's got good examples, and then there's also the the reference for all the different modules that are currently available and things like that. Just my computer's grinding to a halt while we're doing that.
Yeah, the Ansible documentation is generally of quite a high standard. And one of the downside that I found is that if there is some, I mean, this refers to Liam's question earlier on about does it work well in non-trivial decisions based on current context. So there is basic, branching and looping and other controls. But if you're doing sort of complex stuff, then if you're writing it in Python, it'd be easy to just do that complex stuff in Python. Whereas with Ansible, like any declarative DSL, you end up jumping in hoops to try and do some more complex logic or processing than what the tool provides. So the downside is you may need to dive into learning how to write an Ansible command, which is actually very easy. It can encapsulate your logic that you want to do at a lower level, which I think is essentially the main idea is that if you're trying to do something that has multiple branches and multiple loops, then yeah, write a command for that. And it's very easy to distribute those custom commands with your playbook in Python, and you can unit test those and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or just, I mean, in a couple of cases in Charms, I have just called the Python helper script to produce some output for me, because with the Ansible command module and capture that output back into Ansible and then write it to a file, which Ansible makes very easy. So yeah, the nice thing about Python is that you can when something gets complex, it's no problem because you're already in a procedural programming language. When you switch to Ansible, a lot of it's very simple and easy to read, but then when you do want to do something that isn't directly supported, then you have to dive a bit deeper. That's a trade-off for me that's worth making, but it's probably worth mentioning that it is a trade-off.
Yeah, definitely. Like it does support the ability to basically, if you've used Django templates, it's quite similar to that. So you can have tasks which get run for each item in a sequence, or you've got similar conditionals, and it's all Ginger 2 as well. So you can even write your own Ginger 2 template if you needed something complex, template tag. Sorry, if you needed something complex. And use that, which is pretty straightforward as well. So it's all common tools which a lot of people are familiar with. The other thing that makes it really easy is just having access to the config and all the relation data right there in the context.
Yeah.
So you can use that in your playbook as well as in any of your templates that you're working on. So there was another question there. The Real Marv says, what's your opinion on why use Ansible versus Puppet versus Chef, other than that just being Python based? So yeah, Lazy Powers answered that pretty much the same way I would. Ansible was just really quick to learn. So I actually wrote helpers for in Charm helpers. I wrote some Puppet stuff initially, as well as some Salt helpers. The issue with the Puppet stuff, from my point of view, and I'm not an expert in Puppet, but it was just, so with Ansible, you've got your tasks and handlers, and once you understand how a handler is notified, it's pretty easy to understand by looking at the playbook the order that things are happening, because it's just top to bottom with handlers happening at the end. With Puppet, it depends on a whole bunch of different triggers, and it can be going all over the place. Plus, the overhead, it seemed to be a lot slower. Ansible's, by design, really simple. It uses really simple tools. So if you're using Ansible outside of Juju, it's just happening via SSH into machines and so on. Whereas here for Juju, we're actually just running everything locally, but it's obviously just very quick because it doesn't need any service to orchestrate what's happening and things like that. There's another question. Are we contributing modules to push back to the Ansible project? And if we've built any, what would they be? I haven't yet, but I'd love to. I think that the biggest one that kind of sticks out to Simon and I at the moment is things like relation set. It'd be nice to have an easy way to do that. You were going to say something?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That a Juju module or a series of Juju-related tasks to provide like a slightly nicer syntax for Juju could be quite nice. It could be distributed with the Ansible support in Charm helpers, like just included in there and ready to use for everyone. There's a couple of things like doing things like triggering. If you want to set a relation that doesn't exist yet and things like that, you have to put guards in. It would be nice to have a way to specify that a bit more specifically and make it more lightweight and less dense.
Not anymore. That's actually fixed.
Oh yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah, that's true. But yes.
It hasn't landed, but yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I've forgotten that. So yeah, a Juju module might be good, and then maybe some of our more complex sort of patterns or best practices within Juju's might be useful to have something to do that. And that might be a role rather than a module, I guess. If we have a best practice, so our best practice guidelines that we have, and as they get more developed, be some stuff to get things set up that way, and have some roles to do that for you, so that if you are choose to use Ansible, you can simply just include this role and you've got that stuff. I mean, not everything works that way, but some stuff might be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the hope with this Whiskey app role, to be able to do that. And it's I wonder if, I mean, Ansible also has, as well as the modules, they do have a kind of store system set up for shareable roles. So it might be that, I'm not sure whether it would be worth trying to get our Juju-related roles there, because they're specific to running in a Juju environment. But we can find out whether that's useful or not. Wesley says also parsing the MLJs. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of already done in the sense
that's already done.
Yeah, you get so there's Michael referenced it on the slides. When the Charm helpers Ansible support will serialize the entire current Juju environment, all relation state, all relation data, in a YAML file that is read by Ansible, and it's available to your playbook very easily.
It's using Charm. It's using Charm helpers hookend. So to get that data. So I just pointed out. So we wanted to keep the same format, and obviously not reinvent a different format or anything. So it uses hookend to get all the relation data. I think it might be a little bit different because of when we started. The config's all at the top level. Lazy Power is another one. Is the Charm Bootstrap template on GitHub the best place to get started writing Ansible charms today? So both of those are just me trying to push something out that I could start using. I'd like to eventually. So at the moment, yes, but I'd like to eventually get those into some of the Charm tools. So I think there's a Charm Create tool or something which will set up things based on a template. So yeah, at the moment, if you're looking at creating a whiskey application charm, then use the charm bootstrap whiskey. And if it's just a general charm that's not a whiskey app, then the charm bootstrap Ansible one, which I need to update. Any other questions? Cool. I think that's about it. If anyone's run the example projects and deployed it there locally, and have any questions or something's not working, or have a look through the logs and so on, and if you've got any questions, I'll hang around on the chat for longer. You can let me know. Thanks.
I also think the top 5 reasons, definitely make a blog post about that, because I think there's a lot of people that are investigating Ansible. I go to conferences. A lot of people are using Ansible for a lot of things, and I think connecting that in the Juju is like a totally
excellent. Yeah.
Totally excellent.
And top five blog posts always get read.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Lazy Powers just pointed out that someone's working on a boilerplate generator for Ansible-based charms. Excellent. That would be good too.
That would be really.
I'll chat with him as well.
It'd be another thing that would be nice is if we had some support in Charm helpers for sharing roles, so there could be things to go and grab these roles, this role repository from this URL and bring it into the Charm on deployment, and then the roles are there, things like that. Or because the part about sharing roles and reusable is we've just started doing that. So a good solution for sharing those roles, because you might want things that are public and you might want things that are private to share amongst your private channels. Like that.
Right. Yeah. So at the moment, I've just solved that in that example with the makefile target you'll see there, and I use that in a project that we deploy to be able to pull in private and public roles. But yeah, it'd be great to have something similar to the sync charm helpers stuff, where you've got a YAML file which defines which roles you want, and it just pulls those in.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thanks for watching, people.
Thanks, Michael.